Pistol shrimp, the demolition engineer, 4,726 degrees Celsius. That's the temperature inside a bubble made by a shrimp smaller than your pinky finger. For context, the surface of the sun sits around 5,500. So no, that number isn't a typo. A crustacean the length of a paperclip routinely produces a pocket of collapsing vacuum that approaches solar temperatures. In the middle of the ocean, dozens of times a day, just to catch lunch. The pistol shrimp, Alphidae, doesn't sting, it doesn't bite, it doesn't even touch its prey. What it does is far stranger. One of its front claws is massively oversized, almost comically so, and modified into a structure that works less like a pincer and more like a loaded gun. The two halves of that claw fit together with a concave convex piston design. No teeth, no sharp edges, just geometry. A giant striated muscle contracts behind it, building pressure against a biological latch mechanism until the whole thing releases in one violent snap, ejecting a jet of water at roughly 100 kilometers per hour. That jet breaks the local speed of sound underwater. And when something breaks the sound barrier in water, physics does something unsettling. The jet creates what's called a cavitation bubble, a tiny momentary vacuum in the liquid. And when that vacuum collapses on itself, it generates a shockwave of around 80 kilopascals at just 4 centimeters away. That's enough to stun or outright finish off a small crab. But here's the part that still makes physicists uncomfortable. The collapse also produces a flash of light. Not visible light. It happens too fast for that. It's called sonoluminescence, a burst of photons generated purely by the mechanical implosion of water. A shrimp producing light from sound, through plasma, in a bubble that exists for less than a millionth of a second. And yet somehow, the most remarkable part of this animal has nothing to do with physics. It has to do with war. During World War II, the United States Navy deployed networks of underwater hydrophones across the Pacific to track Japanese submarine movements. Sonar operators stationed near coral reefs in the tropics started reporting a problem. Massive, persistent noise. A deafening wall of snapping and crackling that drowned out everything else. It sounded like frying bacon amplified through a speaker the size of a building. The equipment wasn't malfunctioning. The ocean was just loud. Military intelligence didn't dismiss it. They escalated it. The leading theory for months was that the Japanese had deployed a new form of electronic acoustic jamming, some underwater countermeasure specifically designed to blind American sonar. It was classified. Meetings were held, engineers were reassigned, and eventually, in quiet desperation, the Navy brought in marine biologists. What they found wasn't a weapon, it was colonies. Thousands upon thousands of pistol shrimp clustered across reef systems, snapping their claws in overlapping waves. Each snap on its own was small. Together, they produced one of the loudest sustained biological sounds on the planet, enough to render military-grade sonar functionally useless. The entire sonar detection architecture of the era had to be redesigned. Not because of enemy technology, because of a shrimp. And those colonies aren't random clusters. Some species of pistol shrimp are eusocial, a trait usually reserved for ants and bees. They live inside the internal channels of marine sponges, organized around a single breeding queen, defended by a cast of soldiers. Those soldiers don't just snap at threats individually. They coordinate. Synchronized shockwaves fired in sequence, building a wall of concussive pressure that functions like biological artillery. An intruder approaching the sponge doesn't face one snap. It faces dozens, timed to overlap, creating a rolling barrage that few animals their size can push through. A demolition engineer that carries no explosives, just water, geometry, and a latch that releases at the right millisecond. Beaver, the hydraulic engineer. From an animal that destroys with pressure to one that controls it entirely. The beaver, Castor canadensis, doesn't just build dams, it engineers watersheds. And the most unsettling proof of that isn't what it builds, it's what drives it to build in the first place. In a series of experiments that sound almost cruel in their simplicity, researchers placed a small speaker in a completely dry, open field, no water, no stream, no mud, and played the recorded sound of running water. Beavers in the area found the speaker, and they buried it. Mud, sticks, branches, packed and layered until the sound stopped. The researchers turned the volume up. The beavers piled more. When the speaker was waterproofed and kept playing even after being fully entombed, the beavers didn't stop. They kept adding material, compulsively, indefinitely, stacking branches on top of a mound in the middle of a bone-dry clearing, trying to silence a sound that wasn't connected to any actual water. That's not intelligence in the way we usually frame it. It's something more mechanical and, in a way, more impressive. The beaver's entire construction instinct is triggered by a single auditory cue, the sound of flowing water. It doesn't evaluate. It doesn't plan in the abstract. It hears a stream and something in its neurology says, "Stop that. Seal it. Now." And it will not stop until the sound is gone. That compulsion, applied over weeks and months and years, produces some of the most effective hydraulic infrastructure on the planet. The tools it uses are its own teeth. Beaver incisors are bright orange, not from diet, not from staining, but because the front layer of enamel is infused with iron. Actual iron compounds bonded into the tooth structure, making it harder than human enamel. The back of each tooth, made of softer dentin, wears down faster than the front as the beaver gnaws through wood. The result is a self-sharpening edge. Every tree a beaver chews resharpens its teeth into a finer chisel. It never needs to stop and hone its tools. The work itself does that. And the scale of what those teeth produce is difficult to believe until you see it from above. In 2007, a team of researchers scanning satellite imagery from Google Earth to map permafrost changes in northern Alberta, Canada, flagged a structure in Wood Buffalo National Park that they initially assumed was a rendering glitch. A continuous line of organic material stretched across the landscape for what appeared to be hundreds of meters. It wasn't an error, it was a beaver dam. 850 meters long, visible from orbit. Follow-up analysis of historical aerial photographs dated the start of construction to the mid-1970s. Multiple generations of beavers had worked that single dam for over 3 decades, expanding it incrementally, repairing it seasonally, reinforcing weak points as water pressure shifted. They didn't just block a stream, they created an artificial lake where only inaccessible boreal swamp had existed. That lake altered local hydrology. It changed groundwater recharge patterns. It shifted the microclimate of the surrounding forest. A family of rodents, working with sticks and mud and iron-laced teeth, terraformed a piece of northern Canada over the span of a human generation. And the downstream effects, literally, go further than just reshaping land. Beaver dams act as natural filtration systems. Sediment, heavy metals, agricultural runoff, excess nitrogen. The slow-moving water behind a dam allows particles to settle and organic processes to break down contaminants. Multiple studies have shown that beaver ponds filter water more efficiently than engineered treatment plants, costing millions of dollars. Streams that lost their beaver populations saw measurable declines in water quality within years. Streams where beavers were reintroduced recovered. There's even a wildfire connection. The wetlands beavers act as fire breaks, green, saturated buffer zones that slow or stop the spread of flames through dry forest. In regions of the American West ravaged by increasingly severe fire seasons, some land management agencies have started deliberately reintroducing beavers as a fire mitigation strategy, not planting trees, not digging trenches, dropping off a 60-pound rodent with orange teeth and hoping it hears running water. Somewhere on this planet, an insect the size of a marble navigates by the light of the Milky Way. We'll get to that one. But first, an animal that builds things not by stacking, not by sealing, but by slamming its own skull into wood 12,000 times a day. Woodpecker, the carpenter and impact technician, 6 meters per second. That's the speed of a woodpecker's head at the moment it strikes a tree trunk. The deceleration force at impact reaches 1200 G. For reference, a human sustains a severe concussion at around 100 G. Fighter pilots black out at 9. A woodpecker hits 1200 and does it roughly 12,000 times before the sun goes down. Then it wakes up and does it again. Any engineer looking at those numbers would tell you the animal should be brain damaged within minutes. The forces involved should liquefy soft tissue, shear blood vessels, and turn the brain into something unrecoverable. But woodpeckers, Pitchidae, have been doing this for millions of years. They don't get concussions. They don't show signs of cumulative trauma. And the reason comes down to a piece of anatomy so strange it sounds made up. The hyoid bone. In humans, it's a small horseshoe-shaped bone floating in the throat, anchoring the tongue. In a woodpecker, it's something else entirely. The hyoid starts at the base of the lower beak, passes backward through the jaw, wraps around the entire rear of the skull, loops over the top of the cranium, and anchors itself between the eyes, just above where the upper beak begins. It's a bone that circumnavigates the skull, a full-wrap seatbelt made of cartilage and flexible bone, pressing against the brain case from the outside, distributing impact energy across the entire surface rather than concentrating it at the strike point. Every hit, the hyoid absorbs, flexes, and redirects. It's a hydraulic shock absorber built into the skeleton. But that's only one layer of the system. Recent micro-CT imaging revealed something researchers had missed for decades. The front of a woodpecker's skull contains plates of spongy, textured bone, not smooth and solid like the rest of the cranium, but porous and irregular, full of tiny air pockets. These plates act as crumple zones, the same principle used in car bumpers and motorcycle helmets. Material that deforms slightly on impact, absorbing kinetic energy before it reaches the thing you're trying to protect. The woodpecker evolved crumple zones millions of years before we put them in a Volvo. And there's a subtlety even more precise than that. The upper and lower halves of the beak are not the same length. The lower mandible is slightly shorter than the upper. That asymmetry isn't a defect, it's deliberate. When the beak strikes wood, the uneven lengths cause the mechanical shockwave to split into two slightly offset paths, each traveling through a different part of the skull at a different speed. The waves partially cancel each other out. It's destructive interference. The same principle noise-canceling headphones use to eliminate sound, except the woodpecker is using it to eliminate brain trauma. Then there are the eyes. At 1200 G, the internal pressure generated by each impact would be enough to force the eyeballs forward in their sockets. So 1 millisecond, 1,000th of a second, before the beak makes contact, a third eyelid called the nictitating membrane snaps shut. It's not just for protection from flying wood chips. It physically braces the eyeball, holding it in place against the pressure spike. The woodpecker's body knows the hit is coming before the hit arrives, and it locks everything down. And all of this only works if the angle is perfect. If the beak strikes the wood even slightly off axis, a few degrees away from perpendicular, the rotational torque transferred through the neck would be catastrophic. The head would twist under forces the muscles couldn't counter. So the woodpecker makes micro-corrections, tiny adjustments to head angle and neck posture, 20 times per second, recalibrating its strike trajectory between each peck to ensure the impact stays within a fraction of a degree from 90. 12,000 times a day, every single one aimed with the precision of a machine tool. NASA noticed. Aerospace engineers studying how to protect sensitive electronics in extreme deceleration environments, spacecraft landings, atmospheric re-entry, crash survivable flight recorders, spent years dissecting woodpecker anatomy. The hyoid bones wrap around shock distribution, the spongy crumple plates, the beak asymmetry. These weren't curiosities. They were engineering solutions the aerospace industry hadn't thought of yet. The design principles behind the woodpecker's skull directly influence the development of new impact isolation materials used in space probes and aircraft black boxes, devices built to survive a plane coming apart at 400 miles per hour. 12,000 impacts a day. No helmet, no rest days, no accumulated damage. Just a bone that wraps around its own brain, a skull that crumples on purpose, and a pair of eyes that brace themselves 1 millisecond before the world hits. Owl, the supreme judge. The woodpecker fills the forest with noise. The owl erases it. A few years ago, the BBC ran an acoustic test inside a fully sound-shielded studio. The microphones they used were so sensitive they could register a mosquito's wing beat from across the room. The kind of equipment that picks up vibrations most animals don't even know they're making. 3 birds were flown past the array, one at a time. First, a pigeon. On the monitor, the sound graph spiked hard, a rolling wave of turbulence, almost like small thunder rendered in data. Then a peregrine falcon, sharper, a tight, hissing signature, quieter than the pigeon, but clearly there. Then a barn owl, Tyto alba, glided past the microphone, inches away, wingtips practically brushing the sensors. The line on the graph didn't move. Flat, perfectly flat. The most expensive microphones on the planet, in a room designed to hear everything, couldn't detect the owl. 0 audible decibels registered. Nothing flew past that mic as far as science could tell. That's not a quirk. That's engineering. Every primary flight feather on a barn owl has serrated fringes along its leading edge. Tiny comb-like teeth that break incoming air turbulence into micro-vortices so small, they cancel each other out before they can produce sound. Most birds push air and the air pushes back with noise. The owl slices through it and the air doesn't even notice. It's the same principle behind experimental noise-canceling turbine blades, except the owl had it working millions of years before we started sketching prototypes. And that silence isn't a luxury, it's a job requirement. Because the owl doesn't hunt with its eyes. Not primarily, it hunts with its ears. And here's where the design gets almost absurd. A barn owl's ears are not symmetrical. One ear opening sits higher on the skull than the other. That asymmetry is deliberate. It lets the owl calculate 2 planes of sound simultaneously. Horizontal direction from timing differences, vertical direction from volume differences between the mismatched ears. Think of it as a biological coordinate system, triangulating a target in 3-dimensional space using nothing but audio input. A rodent shuffling under 30 centimeters of snow in total darkness in the middle of a field. The owl maps its exact position without ever seeing it. And the sensitivity behind that system is borderline unreasonable. The owl's auditory processing can detect a time difference of 30 millionths of a second, 0.0003 seconds, between sound reaching one ear versus the other. That's the gap. That's the margin the owl uses to decide where to strike. 30 millionths of a second, and it commits. So the owl needs silence to hear, and it needs to hear because its entire method depends on acoustic precision no other bird on Earth can match. If its own wings made noise, it would be trying to judge a whisper in a room full of static. The silence isn't a feature, it's the foundation. Everything else is built on top of it. Now here's where it gets ironic. For thousands of years, owls have symbolized wisdom. Athena's companion, the sage of the forest, the thinker. Except, the owl's brain is almost entirely consumed by its visual and auditory cortex. The raw processing power dedicated to seeing and hearing leaves very little room for anything else. In cognitive problem-solving tests, the kind that crows solve in minutes and parrots eventually crack through persistence, owls fail, reliably. They're not dumb, they're just not built for that. Their entire neural budget went into 2 senses pushed to the absolute edge of biological capability, and the trade-off is that complex reasoning took a back seat. The supreme judge doesn't deliberate, doesn't weigh options, doesn't think things through. It hears, locates, and commits, in a fraction of a second, in total silence, with a level of sensory accuracy that most engineered systems still can't replicate. One more thing, an owl can rotate its head 270 degrees. That's 3/4 of a full circle. In any mammal, that kind of rotation would compress the carotid arteries and cut blood flow to the brain almost instantly. The owl gets around this with a specialized network of blood vessels and contractile reservoirs at the base of its skull that act as backup pumps and pressure buffers. The blood keeps flowing no matter what angle the head reaches. The owl doesn't just look behind itself, it does it without the slightest risk of blacking out. A silent body, ears that map the world in microseconds, a head that rotates without consequence, and a brain that sacrificed everything except the 2 things it needs to do its job flawlessly. Wisdom was never the point. Precision was. Archerfish, the ballistics engineer. The owl hunts through sound. The archerfish, Toxotes chatereus, hunts through physics, across the border between 2 worlds. It's a small fish, freshwater, found in mangroves and brackish estuaries across Southeast Asia and northern Australia. Maybe 10 centimeters long, unremarkable to look at. Silver body, a few dark bands. The kind of fish you'd swim past without a second thought. And then it shoots an insect off a branch 2 meters above the water. That sentence doesn't do it justice. Because what the archerfish does isn't spraying water and hoping for the best. It's applied fluid dynamics executed by a brain smaller than a pea. Here's how it works. The fish spots an insect, a beetle, a spider, an ant, perched on a leaf or branch above the waterline. It positions itself just below the surface, tilts upward, and fires a jet of water from its mouth. But the jet isn't uniform. As the fish spits, it actively changes the aperture of its mouth. Wider at the start, narrower at the end. This means the water that leaves last is traveling faster than the water that left first. Mid-flight, the trailing water catches up to the leading water. The jet compresses. By the time it reaches the target, what started as a stream has accumulated into a single concentrated mass, a water bullet, that arrives with maximum force at the exact moment of impact. The impact force generated can be up to 10 times the fish's own muscle output. Not because the fish is strong, because the physics of jet compression multiplies the energy. The archerfish didn't just evolve a weapon. It evolved a weapon that gets more powerful after it's been fired, and the mouth itself is the barrel. There's a longitudinal ridge running along the roof of the archerfish's palate, a bony keel. When the fish presses its rigid tongue against this ridge, the gap between them forms a narrow hydrodynamic channel. Then the gills snap shut, pressurizing water through that channel and out the front of the mouth in a controlled, directed stream. It's a biological pressure gun, assembled and disassembled with every shot. Now, none of that would matter if the fish couldn't aim, and aiming for the archerfish is a problem most engineers would call unfair. The fish is underwater. The target is in the air. Light bends when it crosses the water-air interface. That means the insect the fish sees isn't where the insect actually is. The image is shifted, refracted, displaced from its true position by an angle that changes depending on the fish's depth and the target's height. The archerfish compensates for this. On the first shot, no test fires, no calibration rounds. It adjusts its angle of attack to account for refraction, distance, target size, and gravity. All processed in real time, all from below the surface, all through a distorted visual field, and it hits. But here's the part that genuinely unsettles researchers. In a comparative psychology experiment, a team placed archerfish in front of underwater computer screens, showing photographs of human faces. The fish were trained to fire their water jets at one specific face in exchange for a food reward. Simple enough. Then the researchers mixed the trained face in with dozens of similar-looking human faces, changed the screen colors, altered the contrast, rotated the images. The archerfish kept firing at the correct face, reliably, accurately, picking out one human face from a crowd, a task that requires fine-grained visual discrimination, performed by a fish that's been separated from mammals by over 400 million years of evolutionary divergence. That's not pattern recognition in the way we usually talk about it with fish. That's facial recognition, from an animal with no neocortex, no frontal lobe, no visual processing architecture even remotely resembling ours. And it's learned, not hardwired. Young archerfish aren't born knowing how to shoot. They learn by watching. Juvenile fish that observe experienced adults firing at targets above the surface pick up the technique dramatically faster than juveniles left to figure it out on their own. It's not trial and error. It's social learning, apprenticeship, a fish watching another fish work and absorbing the method. A creature that compensates for optical distortion it can't possibly understand, fires a self-compressing projectile from a biological rifle barrel, recognizes individual human faces on a screen, and teaches its craft to the next generation by demonstration. 10 centimeters long, bolus spider, the elite lasso cowboy. The archerfish uses water as a weapon. The bolus spider, Mastophora, uses chemistry and a single thread. Every spider you've ever seen builds some kind of web. That's the deal. That's what spiders do. Millions of years of arachnid evolution have refined geometric web architecture into one of the most efficient passive trapping systems in the animal world. Orb weavers build spiraling masterpieces. Funnel weavers construct silk tunnels. Sheet weavers lay flat canopies. The entire order Araneae is, fundamentally, a civilization of engineers who build structures and wait. The bolus spider threw all of that away. She doesn't build a web. She builds a lasso. A A single silk thread, dangling from one front leg, with a heavy, sticky droplet of liquid silk at the tip. That's it. One line, one weight, and she swings it. But here's the part that makes this animal genuinely unnerving in its sophistication. She doesn't swing blindly. She doesn't sit in the dark hoping a moth stumbles into range. She calls them in. The bolus spider synthesizes and releases into the air a cocktail of volatile chemical compounds that precisely mimics the sexual pheromone of a female moth. The specific species varies. Some bolus spiders target one moth species, others target several, but the chemistry is exact. Male moths pick up the scent from dozens of meters away and fly straight toward the source, convinced they've located a mate. What they've located is a spider, hanging from a branch in the dark, slowly spinning a weighted silk line in a controlled arc. The moth arrives. The spider swings. The sticky droplet connects, and the moth is caught. That droplet, by the way, is not ordinary adhesive silk. It's composed of an ultra-low viscosity compound that doesn't dry out when exposed to air, a critical feature, since the spider may swing her lasso for hours before a target arrives. The silk contains elastic proteins that absorb the kinetic energy of the moth's flight on contact. A moth hitting that droplet at full speed doesn't snap the line. The energy dissipates into the silk's molecular structure and the moth stops. Held, suspended. The bolus spider can hold moths weighing up to 3 times her own body mass on that single thread, then reel the line in with her front legs, pulling it up, hand over hand, like a fisherman hauling in something too big for the boat. And it gets stranger. Biologist Kenneth Jurgens spent years documenting bolus spider behavior and noticed something that doesn't seem possible for a creature with a brain barely visible to the naked eye. On windy nights, when air currents cause the sticky lasso to sway too widely and disperse the pheromone plume, the spider adapted. She shortened the silk cable, changed the rotation frequency, shifted from a wide, slow arc to a faster, tighter elliptical motion, compensating for the wind's interference with both the lasso's trajectory and the chemical signal's dispersion pattern. She recalculated the physics of her weapon in real time, adjusting 2 variables simultaneously to maintain hunting efficiency under degraded conditions. That's not instinct in the way we usually use the word. That's dynamic problem solving. From a spider, and then there's the schedule. Throughout the night, the bolus spider changes her pheromone recipe. In the early hours of darkness, she produces the chemical signature that attracts one specific moth species, the one active at dusk. As the night progresses and that species becomes scarce, she switches, alters the molecular formula, begins emitting a different blend that targets a completely different moth species, one that only flies in the pre-dawn hours. She's not running one trap. She's running a rotating menu timed to the activity patterns of her clientele, updated on a biological clock that matches the flight schedules of insects she's never been taught about. An arachnid whose entire evolutionary lineage is built on passive web construction, operating as an active hunter, synthesizing fake pheromones, swinging a weighted lasso with calculated precision, adjusting her physics on windy nights, changing her chemical formula on a schedule. Every other spider builds a net and waits for the world to come to it. The bolus spider decided that was someone else's job. Octopus, the neurosurgeon. 2/3 of an octopus's neurons aren't in its head, they're in its arms. 8 of them, each one running its own local nervous system, tasting, touching, making decisions, and acting on them without waiting for a signal from the central brain. If the octopus were a surgeon, it wouldn't just be operating, it'd have 8 autonomous assistant surgeons working alongside it, each one improvising in real time, each one capable of handling a procedure on its own. The brain sets the general plan. The arms execute however they see fit. The common octopus, Octopus vulgaris, has roughly 500 million neurons. For context, a dog has about 530 million. But a dog keeps the vast majority of those in its skull. The octopus distributes them across its body like a decentralized operating room. And it's not just motor control down there. Each individual sucker, and an octopus has over 1,600 of them, is loaded with thousands of chemoreceptors. That means every sucker can taste whatever it touches, not in a vague sense, in a diagnostic sense. The octopus doesn't just feel prey tissue. It reads the exact chemical composition before making an incision with its chitin beak. It's performing biochemical analysis with its fingertips. And then there's something most vertebrates can't do at all: RNA editing. After DNA transcribes its instructions into messenger RNA, the molecule that tells cells what proteins to build, the octopus can intercept that message and rewrite it. Up to 60% of the messenger RNA in its nerve tissue gets edited on the fly. The purpose? Adapting neural function to sudden temperature shifts in the ocean. When the water drops, the octopus doesn't wait for evolution to catch up over thousands of generations. It edits the instructions in real time. Humans can do this with less than 1% of their genes. The octopus rewrites the majority of its own neural software while it's still running. You'd think an animal with this kind of cognitive firepower would have decades to refine it. It doesn't. Octopuses are semiparous. They reproduce once, and then the body begins shutting itself down. Cellular senescence accelerates. The organs start winding down one by one. Most species don't make it past 2 years, some barely clear one. All of that intelligence, all of that distributed processing power, packed into a window so short it almost feels like a design flaw. But in that window, the things they pull off are unreasonable. At the Coburg Aquarium in Germany, a resident octopus named Otto got tired of the bright halogen lamp above his tank. It stayed on through the night, and Otto apparently decided that was unacceptable. So he climbed to the edge of his tank, extended one arm with surgical aim, and fired a jet of water directly at the lamp's electrical housing. Short circuit. Lights out. Not just his lamp, but the entire building. Staff found no explanation. It happened again the next night, and the next. 3 nights of mysterious blackouts before someone finally stayed late enough to catch Otto mid-shot, arm extended, jet aimed, taking out the electrical system like he'd studied the wiring diagram. And that precision isn't reserved for infrastructure sabotage. In the wild, octopuses sometimes hunt alongside fish, a cooperative strategy where different species flush prey from coral together. Researchers filming these partnerships noticed something odd. Every now and then, the octopus would haul off and punch one of the fish. Not a reflexive arm flail, a deliberate, targeted hit. Further analysis revealed a pattern. The octopuses were hitting fish that weren't pulling their weight. Partners that tried to freeload or snag prey without contributing got physically corrected. The neurosurgeon doesn't just operate, it manages the entire surgical team, and it doesn't tolerate slacking. Crow, the forensic detective. From distributed intelligence to concentrated intelligence. The octopus spread its brains across 8 arms. The crow packed everything into a brain the size of a walnut, and somehow came out ahead on the logic tests. When a crow finds a fallen companion, it doesn't grieve. It opens an investigation. The finder emits a specific alarm call, sharp, unmistakable. And within minutes, dozens of crows converge on the scene. They land around the body and go quiet. Or they don't. Sometimes they caw in bursts, scanning the environment, studying the surroundings. What's nearby? What's different? Was it a cat? A wire? A window? A specific human? The gathering can last hours. And when it ends, the colony updates its internal map. That location gets flagged. That threat gets cataloged. What looks like a funeral is actually a crime scene analysis, a forensic assembly designed to make sure no one else ends up the same way. The American crow, Corvus brachyrhynchos, has a brain that's objectively tiny next to a chimpanzee's or a dolphin's. But size isn't the metric that matters here. Neuronal density is. The crow's forebrain is packed so tight with neurons that its logical processing rivals a 7-year-old human child. And inside that compressed architecture sits the nidipallium caudalaterale, a region that functions like a bird-scale version of the human prefrontal cortex. Executive planning, cause and effect reasoning, sequential tool construction, future thinking, all running on hardware that weighs 14 grams. But the part that makes the crow a forensic detective, not just a smart bird, is the memory. A crow can memorize a specific human face and hold it for over 5 years. Not a general shape, the exact physiognomy. Change your clothes, grow a beard, wear a hat, doesn't matter. The crow knows your face. And here's the part that should make you uneasy. It teaches this to its offspring. Young crows that have never encountered that human will pursue and harass them based entirely on second-hand testimony. A suspect profile, passed down through generations. The most famous proof of this came out of the University of Washington. Researchers needed to capture and ban crows on campus for a study, and they knew the birds would hold a grudge. So they wore masks, a rough, caveman-style rubber face, while trapping and handling the birds. Years later, those same researchers returned to campus wearing the mask, but doing absolutely nothing threatening, just walking. The original crows recognized the face immediately and sounded the alarm. Within seconds, young crows, birds that had never seen the mask, never been captured, never been touched, flew in from surrounding trees and launched a coordinated chase. They dove, swooped, and mobbed the masked figure across campus. The suspect's identity had been passed from parent to child like a case file. To confirm this wasn't just behavioral imitation, researchers ran fMRI neuroimaging on awake crows. When shown a photograph of a human previously associated with threat, the brain regions tied to social memory and critical threat evaluation lit up with intensity. The crow wasn't reacting on instinct. It was processing individual identity with the same forensic precision we'd expect from a detective reviewing a suspect lineup. 14 grams of brain, 5+ years of facial recall, generational case files, no database, no filing cabinet, just neurons packed so dense that nothing gets lost. Lyrebird, the Foley artist. The crow communicates danger with precision. The lyrebird records everything it hears and plays it back with a fidelity that shouldn't be possible from a throat. Somewhere deep in the eucalyptus forests of southeastern Australia, a bird is making the sound of a camera shutter. Not a vague imitation, the exact mechanical click and advance of a specific camera model. A few seconds later, it switches to a car alarm. The full cycle, every pitch shift, every rhythmic pause. Then a chainsaw, then 20 different bird species layered on top of each other, frequencies overlapping without a single timbre bleeding into another. The superb lyrebird, Menura novaehollandii, is one of the shyest, most elusive birds on the continent. Dull brown plumage, ground-dwelling, almost impossible to spot in the dense undergrowth. And yet it produces the most extravagant, artificial, ear-splitting acoustic performance in the natural world. The contrast is almost absurd. A bird that looks like it wants to disappear, putting on a show that sounds like a construction site inside a zoo, inside a nightclub. The instrument behind this is a modified syrinx. Most songbirds control their vocal organ with 4 pairs of intrinsic muscles. The lyrebird has only 3. Fewer muscles should mean less control, but the lyrebird's muscles are inserted in a highly specialized way along lateral cartilages, giving each side of the syrinx independent, asymmetric control over its vibratory membranes. It functions like a high-fidelity analog sound synthesizer, 2 channels, independently tuned, capable of producing 2 completely different sounds at the same time. That's how it layers 20 bird calls without mixing them. It's not switching fast between sounds. It's playing 2 tracks simultaneously and adjusting each one in real time. The males do this to attract females and hold territory. Every sound in the repertoire is an acoustic memory, something the bird heard, stored, and learned to reproduce with muscular precision. And it doesn't just mimic other birds, it copies whatever its environment throws at it. Which brings us to Chook. Chook was a lyrebird at Adelaide Zoo in Australia. She lived near a section of the zoo where workers were constructing a new panda enclosure. For months, Chook heard chainsaws starting up, drills boring through concrete, hammers striking steel, and the reverse warning beep of cargo trucks backing up. The construction ended, the workers left, but Chook kept the entire industrial soundtrack stored in her memory. Years later, she was still performing it, stopping zoo visitors mid-step with the digitally faithful sound of a chainsaw igniting out of nowhere, followed by the rhythmic beep of a truck that hadn't been there in years. She recorded an ecosystem that no longer existed and kept broadcasting it like an archive with a pulse. And it's not just the males putting this talent to work. Females use mimicry too, but with a completely different purpose. While nesting, females imitate the calls of specific local predators, hawks, large reptiles, whatever hunts in that patch of forest. The effect is immediate. Competing species that forage for insects on the forest floor hear what they think is a threat and scatter. The female gets the food supply to herself. Same instrument, same fidelity, entirely different application. One gender uses it as a stage performance. The other uses it as a targeted psychological operation. Bowerbird, the interior designer and aesthete. The lyrebird builds acoustic illusions, the bowerbird builds visual ones, and has the interior design obsession to prove it.
A male satin bowerbird, Tilonorhynchus violaceus, will spend weeks, sometimes months, constructing an elaborate structure out of sticks, leaves, and moss on the forest floor. He'll arrange it into a corridor with carefully angled walls. He'll decorate the entrance with stones, shells, bones, flowers, berries, and whatever colorful debris he can find. He'll spend hours adjusting the placement of a single bottle cap. And then, this is the part, no eggs will ever be laid there.
No chicks will be raised. It's not a nest. It's a showroom, a seduction gallery. The female inspects it, judges the design, and makes her decision. If she approves, mating happens nearby. Then she flies off and builds the actual nest herself, somewhere else. In a tree, simply. The bower stays behind, a monument to an audition that's already over. But there's something happening inside these bowers that goes beyond decoration. Certain species, particularly the great bowerbird, Chlamydera nucalis, arrange objects on the ground around the bower in ascending size order. Smallest items near the entrance, largest items far away. When the female stands inside the corridor and looks out, this gradient creates a forced perspective illusion, a visual trompe-l'oeil that makes the ground appear perfectly uniform in scale. And the male, moving around in this engineered space, appears significantly larger than he actually is. This is a deliberate optical illusion. It requires spatial reasoning, an understanding of the viewer's position, and consistent maintenance every time an object shifts. Researchers tested it by scrambling the gradient. The males rebuilt it. Every time. The brain region responsible for this is the hyperstriatum, an area tied to complex visual processing and spatial memory. In bowerbirds, it's drastically larger than in other birds of similar body size. They're not just seeing the world. They're composing it, judging visual harmony, detecting asymmetry, processing geometry with the obsessive precision of someone who can't leave a crooked painting on the wall. A researcher in Australia tested this by moving a single blue straw 1 centimeter out of position while the bird was away. When the male returned, he noticed. He walked to the displaced object, studied it, and spent several minutes nudging it back into its exact original spot. 1 centimeter. That's the margin of error this bird works with. Another researcher pushed the test further. While a male was out collecting materials, the scientist placed several red bottle caps among the bird's meticulously curated collection of blue objects. Blue is the satin bowerbird's signature, the color that defines the palette, the brand, the entire aesthetic identity. When the bird returned and saw the red intruders, he entered a visible state of agitation. He grabbed each red cap with his beak and hurled it, not dropped, hurled, meters away from the bower. The wrong color wasn't just unwelcome. It was offensive. It was a contamination of the design intent. And like any industry with high stakes and limited clients, it gets dirty. Males spy on each other's bowers. If a rival has a superior collection, more blue objects, better arrangement, a stronger visual impression, competing males wait for the owner to leave. Then they move in, tear apart the structure, scatter the decorations, and steal the most valuable pieces for their own galleries. Industrial espionage, vandalism, sabotage, all in the name of interior design. The bowerbird doesn't just build. It curates, defends, and weaponizes aesthetics, with a brain that processes beauty as a competitive resource and a temperament that treats a misplaced bottle cap like a personal insult. Dung beetle, the astronomer navigator. There is an insect that navigates by the Milky Way. Not the sun, not the moon. The Milky Way. That faint, powdery smear of 100 billion stars that most humans can't even see anymore because of light pollution. A beetle the size of a grape reads it like a highway sign. The dung beetle, Scarabaeus satirus, works the night shift in the savannas of southern Africa, doing what most creatures won't touch. It finds a fresh pile of herbivore dung, carves out a perfect sphere, sometimes weighing more than 141 times its own body weight, which is the human equivalent of one person pushing 6 fully loaded double-decker buses. And then it does something no one expected. It climbs on top of the ball, and it dances. A full 360-degree rotation, right there on the summit of a dung sphere under the open sky. For years, scientists assumed it was a balance check or some territorial display. It's neither. That rotation is a calibration sequence. The beetle is taking a mental photograph of the positions of celestial bodies overhead, programming a geometric escape route before it even starts moving. Its compound eyes are divided into specialized regions. The dorsal ommatidia, the clusters facing upward, are tuned to detect polarized light. While most navigating animals rely on the sun or familiar landmarks, dung beetles can isolate the faint polarization pattern generated by moonlight, and more remarkably, the dim, diffuse glow of the galactic plane filtering through the atmosphere. They're reading a signal so weak that most optical instruments need long exposure photography to capture it. Here's what makes this absurd. This creature performs what is arguably the least glamorous job in the animal world: sanitation, recycling waste that nothing else wants. But the navigation system it uses to do that job is more sophisticated than anything ancient human sailors had. The Polynesians who crossed the Pacific used star positions and wave patterns. The dung beetle uses the entire galaxy, and we know this because scientists proved it in the strangest experiment in entomological history. A team from Lund University in Sweden brought dung beetles into a digital planetarium at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Inside the dome, they could control every light in the artificial sky. First, they projected only the Milky Way's glow. No individual stars, no moon. The beetles rolled their dung balls in perfect straight lines, efficient and fast, heading directly away from competitors. Then they turned off the Milky Way and left only isolated stars scattered across the dome. The beetles still moved, but their paths started to wobble. Then they blacked out everything. Total darkness, and the beetles fell apart. They walked in tight, aimless circles. Their straight-line efficiency collapsed into confusion. A creature with a brain smaller than a pinhead had just demonstrated a dependency on the cosmic map overhead. The same band of light that ancient Greeks named Galaxias, the Milky Circle. But the planetarium wasn't the only experiment. Other researchers at Witwatersrand took a more low-tech approach. They made tiny cardboard caps, hats essentially, and glued them onto the beetles' heads so they couldn't see the sky above them. The effect was instant. The beetles lost all ability to walk straight. They wandered in erratic loops, bumping into obstacles, circling back on themselves. And because dung beetle society is ruthlessly competitive, the disoriented beetles got robbed. Rivals stole their carefully shaped balls while they stumbled around, unable to find their bearing. Take the galaxy away from a dung beetle and it doesn't just get lost. It loses everything it worked for. There's something worth sitting with there. An animal that spends its entire life handling waste, that lives and breathes inside what every other species discards, carries inside its eyes a direct functioning connection to the structure of the universe. No other insect on Earth has been proven to use the Milky Way for orientation. Just the one rolling dung across the sand. Sea turtle, the transoceanic captain. The beetle reads the sky. The turtle reads the planet itself. On a beach in Indonesia, a female leatherback sea turtle, Dermachelys coriacea, finishes laying her eggs. She's slow. She's clumsy. Her flippers, so perfectly engineered for open water, are almost useless on sand, dragging her massive body forward in painful lurches. Her eyesight on land is poor. She's nearsighted, vulnerable, exposed. If you saw only this moment, you'd think evolution had given up on her somewhere around the Cretaceous and never looked back. Then she reaches the waterline, and everything changes. The moment the ocean touches her, the leatherback becomes the most precise transoceanic navigator in evolutionary history, more reliable than any nautical technology humans built before the satellite era. Most people know sea turtles have some kind of magnetic sense. What most people don't know is how absurdly advanced it actually is. This isn't a simple compass pointing north. The leatherback operates a bi-coordinate geomagnetic map system. She can measure two separate properties of Earth's magnetic field simultaneously: the total intensity, how strong the field is at her location, and the inclination angle, meaning how steeply the magnetic field lines dive into the planet's surface relative to where she's swimming. Combine those two readings, and you get something that no compass can give you. You get exact latitude and exact longitude, in real time, continuously updating as she moves, a biological GPS, encoded in tissue. The hardware behind it sits inside her nasal cavities and certain brain cells, biogenic magnetite crystals, Fe3O4, the same mineral that makes lodestones magnetic. These microscopic crystals are physically connected to the ophthalmic branch of the trigeminal nerve. As the turtle changes heading, the crystals rotate inside their cellular housing and exert mechanical pressure on the cell membranes around them. That pressure gets converted into nerve impulses that feed directly into her brain's spatial processing centers. She doesn't think about where north is. She feels the planet's magnetic architecture pressing against the inside of her skull, and the routes she runs with this system are staggering. That female leatherback in Indonesia, scientists tracked her. She left her nesting beach and swam into open ocean. No islands, no continental shelf, no visual reference of any kind. Just water in every direction for months. She crossed the entire Pacific Ocean in a straight line, all the way to the coast of Oregon, more than 20,000 kilometers away. She went there to feed on jellyfish aggregations in the cold, nutrient-rich currents off the Pacific Northwest. Then she turned around and started swimming back. She held course through storms, through massive lateral currents that should have pushed her hundreds of kilometers off track. Through weeks where the surface conditions changed so drastically that any human vessel without satellite navigation would have drifted. She didn't deviate. The magnetic map locked in her nasal cells didn't let her. 19,000 kilometers of open Pacific, straight line, no correction needed. And here's what makes it even harder to process. She was born knowing how to do this. Marine biologists proved it with an experiment called the Fox-Smith coil setup. They placed hatchling sea turtles, days old, never having left the beach where they emerged, into circular water tanks surrounded by large electromagnetic coils. By running controlled currents through the coils, they could artificially alter the magnetic field inside the tank to simulate the geomagnetic signature of locations thousands of kilometers away. When the coils mimicked the magnetic field of a point far to the north, the hatchlings turned south. When the field shifted to simulate the eastern Atlantic, they adjusted west. Every time the researchers changed the coordinates, the turtles corrected course, as if they already carried a complete map of the planet's magnetic topology inside their cells. Because they do. It's not learned. It's not taught by a parent. It's preloaded, written into DNA before the egg even cracks open. A turtle that has never seen the ocean already knows where every point in it sits on the magnetic grid. On land, she can barely see 10 feet ahead. In the water, she can feel the curvature of the earth. Honey Guide, the business consultant. The turtle navigates alone across an ocean. The Honey Guide navigates with someone and charges a fee. In the dry Miombo woodlands of Mozambique, a small, plain-looking bird called the Greater Honey Guide, indicator, has built something that shouldn't exist in nature. A cross-species business partnership with humans, not domestication, not trained behavior. A freelance consulting arrangement, negotiated in real time, with deliverables on both sides. It works like this. The Honey Guide locates a hive of African bees, aggressive, well-defended colonies hidden inside hollow trees or rock crevices that the bird can't access on its own. So it goes looking for a client. It finds a human, often a member of the Yao people, traditional honey hunters who've worked this arrangement for generations, and announces the deal with a specific call, a sharp, insistent chirp repeated in rapid bursts. Then it flies to the nearest branch in the direction of the hive and waits. If the human follows, the bird moves to the next branch, then the next, leading them through dense bush for kilometers if necessary, adjusting pace, circling back if the human falls behind. It's not fleeing, it's not foraging, it's guiding, deliberately, patiently, with a destination in mind that only it knows. When they arrive at the hive, the human does the heavy work, using smoke to calm the bees, then cracking open the rigid hive structure with axes or machetes to get at the honeycomb inside. The honey guide watches. And when the human leaves with the honey, the bird moves in to collect its payment. But here's the thing that makes the arrangement so strange. The honey guide doesn't care about honey. Its real target is beeswax and the exposed larvae left behind in the broken comb. Beeswax is a complex chain of lipid esters that is nearly indigestible for virtually every vertebrate on the planet. The honey guide's stomach, though, harbors a specialized serophagic microbiome, symbiotic bacteria and yeasts that produce enzymes capable of breaking those stubborn chemical bonds and extracting pure calories from dry wax, a food source that no competitor can touch. The bird doesn't want what the human wants. It wants what the human throws away. That's not parasitism. That's a business model. And research backs the numbers. Studies have shown that this partnership reduces human search time for wild hives by 64%. The bird's biological consulting doesn't just help. It elevates honey collection efficiency to something approaching industrial output. A creature weighing less than 50 grams is measurably improving the economic productivity of an entire human community. But the most remarkable proof that this is a true partnership, not just coincidence or opportunism, came from a study published in the journal Science. Researchers working with Yao honey hunters discovered that honey guides don't respond to just any human sound. The Yao use a specific traditional call to summon the birds, a loud, trilled brrr-hum sound passed down through generations of hunters. When researchers played this call in the bush, honey guides appeared and began guiding behavior almost immediately. When they played other human sounds, shouting, clapping, random words, the birds ignored them completely. The honey guide has learned a human word, or more precisely, it's co-evolved a shared language with a specific human culture, a call and response protocol that both species understand, passed down not through genetics, but through cultural transmission on both sides. The birds teach their behavior to their young. The hunters teach the call to their children. Two completely unrelated species maintaining a verbal contract across centuries. And there's one more detail. A local legend among the Yao that biologists have taken seriously enough to document because the pattern keeps showing up. If a human takes the honey and leaves nothing behind, no wax, no comb scraps, no larvae, the honey guide remembers. And the next time that person follows a bird into the bush, the legend says, it won't lead them to a hive. It'll lead them straight to a resting spot favored by a lion, or the hiding place of a black mamba. No one has formally tested this in a controlled experiment. But the Yao don't test it either. They always leave the scraps. In a forest with no contracts, no courts, and no written language, a 50-gram bird has established an interspecies economy built on trust, mutual benefit, and just enough implied threat to keep the terms honest. That's not instinct. That's consulting.
Leafcutter ant, the agronomist. They don't eat the leaves. That one fact changes everything you think you know about leafcutter ants. Atacephalotes. Every nature clip you've ever seen, those endless highways of ants hauling green fragments 10 times their own body weight, none of that food is for them. Not a single bite. The leaves are raw material, industrial input, feedstock for a manufacturing process that's been running, uninterrupted, for over 50 million years. Here's what's actually happening. Deep underground, in climate-controlled chambers carved out of solid earth, leafcutter ants run farms, real farms. They cultivate a single species of fungus, Leucoagaricus gongolophorus, that exists nowhere else on this planet outside their care. The leaves get chewed into a wet pulp, mixed with ant saliva and fecal droplets rich in digestive enzymes, and laid down as compost for the fungus to feed on. The fungus grows. The ants eat the fungus. That's the entire economy. 50 million years before the first human pressed a seed into dirt along the Euphrates, these ants had already invented agriculture, monoculture, composting, and fertilization engineering. They were farmers before farming existed as a concept in any brain on Earth. But growing a crop is only half the problem. The other half is protecting it. Any farmer knows that. And leafcutter ants solved it in a way that would make a modern agrochemist sit down. Worker ants, assigned to garden maintenance, carry secretory glands on their exoskeletons that produce antibiotic and antifungal compounds. They bathe the fungus gardens with these chemicals constantly, wiping out parasitic molds before they can take hold. This is targeted pesticide application.
Not random, not broad spectrum. These ants identified the specific threats to their crop and evolved a chemical response calibrated to neutralize them without harming the fungus itself. Industrial pest management, running on biological software, automated across millions of workers. No meetings, no supply chain delays, just execution. And here's where microbiology gets involved. Researchers analyzing the exoskeletons of leafcutter workers discovered they carry a specific strain of actinobacteria, a living antibiotic factory riding on their bodies. That bacterium produces novel antimicrobial compounds that human science is still trying to isolate and synthesize. Compounds that may one day help us fight resistant hospital superbugs, the kind of infections that modern medicine is running out of answers for. The ants have been carrying the solution on their backs for millions of years. We just started looking. Now, the cutting itself. Watch a leaf cutter slice through a leaf in real time, and it looks clean, almost effortless. That's because it is. Thanks to engineering most people wouldn't associate with an insect. Their mandibles are reinforced with zinc and manganese deposits, hardened to a level that rivals industrial cutting tools. But the real trick isn't the blade, it's the motor. While cutting, the ant contracts its thorax muscles at kilohertz frequencies, thousands of cycles per second, sending ultrasonic vibrations through the mandibles. The jaw becomes an electric saw. This crypto-oscillation reduces the force needed to slice through tough plant tissue by a massive margin. It's the same principle behind an ultrasonic scalpel in a surgical suite. The ants just got there first, by about 50 million years. And it's not like any ant just picks up a leaf and starts cutting. The colony runs on extreme specialization. The largest workers, soldiers with heads wider than their bodies, stand guard along the foraging trails. Medium-sized workers do the actual cutting and carrying. The smallest workers ride on top of the leaf fragments being carried home, not freeloading but actively defending the carrier from parasitic flies that try to lay eggs on the ant's neck while her mandibles are full. Back in the nest, a separate caste of even tinier workers tends the fungus gardens, weeding out contamination strand by strand. And another caste handles waste, carrying spent compost and colony refuse to dedicated garbage chambers located far from the gardens. These refuse workers are essentially quarantined. Other ants avoid them. They carry different chemical signatures. They live apart. The colony invented sanitation zoning. A mature leafcutter colony can house 8 million individuals, and the infrastructure they build to support that population is staggering. A single nest can involve the excavation and displacement of 40 tons of earth. Not a typo, 40 tons. The resulting structure is a network of fungus cultivation chambers, waste disposal areas, and a ventilation system built on pure physics. Vertical shafts arranged to exploit the chimney effect, passively expelling carbon dioxide and drawing in fresh oxygen without any moving parts. No fans, no pumps. Just architecture designed so precisely that airflow regulates itself. We know this because someone decided to prove it. An international research team found an abandoned leafcutter nest in Brazil and wanted to see the full picture. So they pumped 10 tons of liquid cement through the ventilation ducts. It took weeks. When the cement dried, they spent months excavating the surrounding earth, peeling back the ground like an archaeological dig. What emerged was an underground megalopolis, thousands of cultivation chambers, perfectly graded highways connecting every sector, ventilation shafts positioned with structural precision. The researchers compared the scale of the construction, relative to the size of the builders, to humanity's Great Wall of China. Except the ants didn't need an emperor, or a blueprint, or a single foreman. Honeypot ant, the living logistics manager. Leafcutters built the farm. But what happens when the land gives you nothing? When the rain doesn't come and the flowers don't bloom and the only thing the desert offers is heat and silence? Honeypot ants, Myrmecocystus, solve that problem. And the solution is one of the strangest forms of labor in the entire animal world. Inside certain colonies in the deserts of Australia, the American Southwest, and parts of Africa, there are ants that will never move again. They hang from the ceilings of the deepest chambers, legs gripping the rock above, abdomens swollen to the size of green grapes, translucent with stored nectar. They are called repletes. And they are, in every functional sense, living storage tanks. Here's how it works. When food is abundant, after a rare desert rain, when flowers bloom and nectar flows, Forager ants collect as much liquid as they can carry. They return to the nest and feed it, mouth to mouth, to designated workers. These workers don't pass the food along. They hold it, and they keep receiving more and more. Their abdomens inflate. The rigid chitin plates of their exoskeleton are separated by a flexible membrane called the arthrodile membrane, a biological dermis that can stretch to extraordinary levels without tearing. That membrane is the key to the entire system. Under normal conditions, it's barely visible, thin seams between the armored plates. But as nectar accumulates, the membrane expands, pulling the plates apart until the abdomen becomes a taut, translucent balloon. The internal pressure is enormous, but the membrane holds. It doesn't leak, it doesn't rupture. It isolates the nectar from the outside environment, sealing it away from oxygen that would degrade the sugars. The abdomen can expand to 10 times its original volume. The ant becomes a sphere of amber liquid, suspended upside down in the dark. And then the desert goes dry. Weeks pass, months. The surface is barren. Nothing blooms, nothing flows, and the colony survives because the repletes are still hanging there, full, waiting. Workers approach them and tap their antennae against the replete's mouth. The living barrel regurgitates a measured portion of nectar. Just enough. Not a flood. A ration. The colony eats from its own infrastructure. Think about what that means for the replete. Ants are defined by movement, by relentless, almost frantic activity. Every species, every caste, every role in ant society involves walking, carrying, digging, fighting, signaling, except this one. The logistics manager is sentenced to permanent stillness. She will hang from that ceiling for the rest of her life, unable to walk, unable to forage, unable to do anything except hold the supply and release it on demand. She is both the warehouse and the warehouse keeper. A living paradox in a society built on motion. And the nectar doesn't spoil. That's the part that should make you pause. In a warm underground chamber, sugar-rich liquid should ferment within days. Bacteria should bloom. Fungi should colonize. But the replete secretes natural antibiotics from her postpharyngeal gland directly into the stored liquid, maintaining it in a sterile state, safe against every subsurface microorganism that should, by all rights, ruin the stockpile. The ant is not just a container, she's a preservative system. Months pass, and the honey inside her is as clean as the day it was deposited. Aboriginal peoples of the Australian desert figured this out a long time ago. During severe droughts, the kind that push survival to the edge, they learned to read the surface of the red earth for subtle signs of honeypot ant nests buried deep below. They dug with careful, almost surgical precision, working slowly to avoid collapsing the fragile galleries. They didn't take the whole colony. They extracted only a few repletes. The swollen abdomens were consumed as a sacred source of pure glucose and medicinal hydration, concentrated energy in a landscape that offered none. They treated the ants as what they were, living survival barrels, buried in the desert by a civilization that had been preparing for drought since before humans walked upright. Firefly Photurus, the spy and signal hacker. The ants built systems of trust. Millions of workers coordinating through chemistry, sharing food mouth to mouth, sacrificing mobility for the colony's future. Every signal in the nest means exactly what it says. Every chemical cue is honest. The whole operation runs on reliability. This firefly exploits exactly that kind of trust. The female Photurus sits on a leaf at dusk and does nothing. She waits. Around her, the darkness comes alive with flashing light. Dozens of male fireflies from other species, mostly Photinus, pulsing their species-specific mating codes into the night. Each pattern is unique. A signature. The male flashes a sequence that says, in biochemical shorthand, "I am one of you. I am healthy. I am here." And the female of his species is supposed to answer with her own flash, a timed reply that says yes. The Photurus female watches. She reads the code. She decodes the rhythm, the interval, the wavelength, and then she answers, perfectly imitating the yes signal of the Photinus female. The male sees it, adjusts his flight, and descends toward what he believes is a willing mate of his own kind. He lands, and he doesn't leave. Here's the mechanism. The light organ in a firefly works by combining a protein called luciferase with a substrate called luciferin in the presence of oxygen. Every species has the same basic chemistry. What makes the flash unique is the timing, how long the oxygen channels stay open, how quickly the reaction fires and shuts down. Photurus females have a modified nervous system that gives them ultrafine control over the millisecond timing of oxygen delivery to the light organ. They can adjust the flash duration, the delay, the decay curve. They can switch dialects. One moment she's speaking Photinus carolinus. The next, she's answering a completely different species 3 meters away. A single Photurus female can memorize and replicate the flash codes of up to 4 different neighboring species. She keeps switching channels in the dark, broadcasting one false signal after another, until a male from any species responds and follows the light down. Entomologist James Lloyd spent decades documenting this behavior. He called them femme fatale fireflies, and the name stuck because the precision is unsettling. This isn't opportunistic, it's systematic. She reads the airspace, identifies which species are active, selects the appropriate code, and deploys it. One male gets lured in and consumed. She resets, switches to the next frequency, lures another. A single female can clear multiple males from different species in a single night, methodically working through the airwaves until there's no one left answering. What makes it worse, or more impressive, depending on where you sit, is that the Photinus males aren't oblivious. They've been under this pressure for millions of years. Some species have evolved countermeasures: longer approach flights, test flashes from a distance, circling patterns to verify the source before committing. And the Photurus females adjusted. They refined their timing. They added subtle variations to the false signal to account for the male's hesitation. It's an arms race fought entirely in milliseconds of light, and so far the spy is winning. It's biological social engineering. She's not faster. She's not stronger. She hacks the one thing every living system depends on, the assumption that a signal means what it says. But here's the part that shifts this from dark to something deeper. The real motive isn't calories. Photinus males carry a defensive compound called lucibuphagin, a substance chemically similar to the compounds found in certain toads. It makes them unpalatable to spiders and other predators. Photurus females cannot produce lucibuphagin on their own. Their bodies don't have the metabolic pathway, so they acquire it the only way they can, by consuming the males that carry it. Once absorbed, the compound is transferred into her eggs. Her future offspring hatch already loaded with a chemical shield against predators, armor they inherited from a male of another species who was lured in by a false promise in the dark. She was never hunting for food. She was stockpiling a defensive arsenal for a generation she would never meet. Every false flash, every mimicked signal, every male that followed the light and didn't come back, all of it was resource extraction, targeted, calculated, in service of offspring that won't know her, won't know the source, and won't know the cost. The ants built economies on honesty. The firefly built hers on the opposite. And the currency she trades in is trust itself. Cheetah, the F1 high-performance engineer. 3 seconds. 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 3 seconds. That's not a sports car stat. That's a cheetah, a 60-pound cat made of tendons and aerodynamics, outperforming machines that cost more than most houses. And most supercars still lose the drag race. But here's the thing no one tells you about the fastest land animal on Earth. It has a built-in kill switch. The cheetah, Acinonyx jubatus, is the only land predator whose body is entirely engineered for one thing: acceleration. Its spine is so flexible it functions like a loaded spring, stretching and compressing with each stride. At full extension, a single bound covers 7 meters. That's almost the length of a school bus. The claws are semi-retractile. They don't fully pull back like a house cat's. Instead, they stay partially exposed, gripping the ground the way spike shoes grip a track or rain tires grip a wet circuit. Every part of this animal is built for traction, torque, and explosive forward motion. And then, roughly 10 seconds in, everything shuts down. During a chase that lasts barely a few seconds, The cheetah's respiratory rate rockets from 60 breaths per minute to 150. Its lungs are processing oxygen so fast that the blood temperature climbs toward 41 degrees Celsius. That's the edge of thermal shock. So the brain steps in and does something no Formula One team would ever allow. It pulls the plug. The cheetah stops, not because it chose to, because the engine overheated. The Royal Veterinary College of London wanted to understand exactly what happens during these chases, so they fitted GPS collars with G-force sensors on wild cheetahs in Africa. What they found wasn't about top speed. The cheetah's greatest weapon turned out to be its brakes. In a single step, it can shed 32 kilometers per hour, planting those semi-retractile claws into the dirt like ceramic brake discs on a racing car. That deceleration allows 90-degree turns at speeds where centrifugal force would shatter the joints of any other animal at that weight. The cheetah doesn't just run fast, it corners like nothing else alive. But the vulnerability comes after. Once the sprint ends, whether the hunt succeeded or not, the cheetah collapses into a state of total exhaustion. It needs up to 30 minutes just to recover enough to stand. And in that window, everything moves in. Hyenas, leopards, even vulture flocks. They walk right up to it and take the meal. The cheetah can't mount any defense. It just lies there, breathing, while its food disappears. The fastest animal alive spends more time losing its food than eating it. Electric eel, the high-voltage engineer. The cheetah is all about speed. The electric eel is all about power. And it doesn't even need to make contact. 860 volts, 1 full ampere of current. That's the largest electric discharge ever recorded in any animal on the planet. Enough energy to light a row of commercial LED bulbs. And it comes from a fish that looks like a wet sock. The electric eel, Electrophorus electricus, isn't technically an eel, it's a knife fish.
And roughly 80% of its body is made of electricity. 3 specialized organs, the main organ, Hunter's organ, and Sachs's organ, run almost the entire length of the animal. Inside those organs sit thousands of disc-shaped cells called electrocytes, stacked in series exactly like the metal plates inside the battery that Alessandro Volta invented in 1800. When the moment comes, every single one of those cells fires simultaneously, triggered by the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. The result is a biological power plant with a discharge that most people wouldn't want to experience even once. But the voltage isn't the strangest part. It's how the eel hunts. It doesn't chase. It fires high-voltage pulses at the water around it, and those pulses act directly on the motor neurons of any hidden fish nearby. The prey's muscles contract involuntarily. It spasms, it twitches, and in doing so, it reveals its position. The eel hunts by making other animals betray themselves, remote neuromuscular hijacking delivered through water, and it never shocks itself. Thick layers of adipose tissue and modified high-resistance skin insulate the eel from its own weapon. It's wrapped in its own protective casing, like a live wire sheathed in rubber. In 1800, the naturalist Alexander von Humboldt witnessed something in the Amazon basin that became one of the most infamous scenes in the history of field biology. To capture electric eels for study without getting shocked, local guides drove roughly 30 wild horses into a shallow swamp full of eels. The eels, sensing the threat of heavy hooves crashing through the water, unloaded everything they had. Full-power discharges over and over directly into the horses. Some of the horses locked up from muscle paralysis and went down in the water. When the eels had completely drained their biological batteries and had nothing left to fire, Humboldt walked in and pulled them out with bare hands. There's one more behavior that still unsettles researchers. When a large, partially submerged predator wades toward the eel, a mammal say, the eel doesn't retreat. It leaps. It launches itself out of the water and presses its electric chin directly against the intruder's chest. This routes the full discharge through the target's body rather than letting the current dissipate through the surrounding water. Maximum shock, minimum waste. An animal that turns itself into a live stun gun on contact. 860 volts, no moving parts, no warning.